throw in the towel? God said, not yet. We just have to hang in there. So this morning we will be in the book of Judges, 6th chapter. And first, giving honor to God and to you, all my sisters and brothers in Christ. And so we talked about this actually in Bible study on Wednesday. And so I wanted to expand on it and just, dive a little bit deeper into Gideon, the story of Gideon. And today is not even like all of Gideon's story, but it's still a thought for today. So the thought for today is putting out the fleece. Have anybody ever heard putting out the fleece or put out the fleece? Anybody ever heard that term? Well, I had not either until I started studying this lesson. So Gideon, he was a judge in Israel, and also he's one of the members of the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11 chapter. So when you read Hebrews 11 chapter, they mention different people from the Bible who are in the Hall of Faith. You know how they have a Hall of Fame? Well, there's a Hall of Faith, and those are for people in the Bible who demonstrated great faith. And so he's mentioned also in the chapter of Hebrews. So we want to go ahead and get started and talk about this thought about put out the fleece. And so before you leave today, you're going to know what putting out the fleece mean. And maybe you've put some out before, but you never knew what it was called, putting out a fleece. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Some of the verses I will read, and some parts of it I will just talk about. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So first verse, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the caves, mountains, and the strongholds. So what are we saying here in the first verse? What it's saying here is that the Midianites, they oppressed the children of Israel because of the evil that they were doing. And this made me think about that sometimes as we are going through trials and tribulations and we want to say, the devil is doing this and the devil is doing that. But have we ever stopped to think about that we could be oppressed and going through trials and tribulations because we are not living a life that's pleasing to God? Have we ever stopped to think about that? So the children of Israel, we know that they were God's children, but God was allowing their enemies to oppress them because they were not living a life that was pleasing to God. So think about that. When things are happening, reflect, am I being disobedient? Have I gotten off track? Maybe that's why some of these things are happening. And it also made me think about like the weather. Like if you all watch the news, have you noticed the weather is a big topic? I mean, they spend more time talking about the weather than other stuff, and there's devastation everywhere. There are earthquakes and hurricanes and bad storms and fires and tornadoes, and all this stuff is happening, and it makes me wonder if God is talking to us but we're just not listening. What do you think? What could all this devastation be about? And they talk about global warming and all this kind of stuff. And then what about our leader and the things that we see going on with our country and the violence that we see and the mental illness and everything that's happening in our country? Could it be that God is allowing this stuff because we're not being obedient? Or could these things just be happening? So that's what made me think about what it made me think about as it relates to today. So let's move on to our next scripture, which is verse 7. So in between verse 2 and verse 7, it just talks about all the things that the Midianites were doing to the children of Israel. So they were actually burning their crops and taking their stuff and, taking their cattle, and they were actually starving because the Midianites were just coming into their land doing all kinds of things. And so, if you've ever been hungry, you're going to cry out to somebody, right? So they cried out to the Lord, the 7th verse. So when they cried out to the Lord because of the Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites. So what I want to say is don't be afraid to cry out to the Lord and expect him to answer. When they cried out to the Lord, he sent a prophet to give them some information. Now, how many want to hear from the Lord on today? I know I do. If something is not going right, I want to cry out to the Lord and I want to hear from the Lord. And the other thing I thought was interesting too is that they wasn't even obeying the Lord God of Israel, but they knew who to cry out to. That's just interesting, isn't it? When they needed a lot of help. So keep that in mind. We might not always be doing what we're supposed to be doing, but we better know the God that's on the throne is who we need to go to in times of trouble. So let's keep moving. So this prophet, he came and he said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. I brought you up out of the slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in those whose land you now live, but you have not listened to me." So the prophet came in to tell them, let me tell you why you having all these problems. And last week we talked about being the salt of the earth and how we're supposed to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ where we go. And so that's what the prophet is telling them. Yeah, you're right. You all are having problems, but let me tell you why you having problems. The first thing is you don't know the God who brought the children out of Egypt. You heard about him, but you're not relying on him. He had to remind them of this loving God and of the power that God has. How many know that God has power today? That he has all power. And sometimes we just need somebody to stop and remind us of that we serve a mighty God and he has all power and that he can do all things. And so he was also saying to them, these things are happening to you all because you didn't listen to God. So if you didn't know today, now you know that these things are happening because you are not doing what God told you to do. And so what we have to realize is that when we are obedient, God's got it all under control. But when we doing our own thing, we can expect to have some bumps in the road that are hard for us to get past. So how many want it as smooth as possible? Not that you won't have trials and tribulations, but how many I want it as smooth as smooth as possible. When it's not, then I'm thinking about what this prophet said. Let me examine my life because I might be out of step with what God wants me to do. All right. So Gideon, let me tell you about Gideon. So as I said, the Midianites were oppressing them and taking their crops and doing all kinds of things, and they were hiding in caves. So Gideon, he was a judge, and what he was doing is he was hiding too, just like everybody else. But he was hiding at the bottom of a wine press, and he was doing what they call threshing wheat. Does anybody know what it means to thresh wheat? I didn't know either when I started studying this lesson. But he was threshing wheat. So it's a process back then where you beat the wheat stalk and then you get a little wheat kernel. And from that kernel, you can make flour and other kinds of things that you need from wheat. So he was hiding from the Midianites and he was threshing wheat because he was trying to feed his family. And so that he was hiding. And so as he was hiding, we're going to talk about this. We'll start with verse 11. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash, the clan of Abizar. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a wine press to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." And I was like, oh, this is so good. Sometimes when we are alone, you're not alone, and it's okay to be alone because he out there hiding, he's scared, he trying to get this wheat together so they can have something to eat, and then this angel of the Lord appears to him. How beautiful is that? So don't worry about it. When you're alone and you feel afraid and you feel faithless, don't worry about it because that could be just the time that God could show up and talk to you and give you a message. All right. So he called him a mighty hero. And Gideon was like, what? A mighty hero? So Gideon replied, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt, but now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites?" And so what Gideon is saying, you calling me a hero, you calling me a mighty hero, but how could that be? We heard about the God of Israel, but he's never done nothing for us. He never done nothing for me. So he was questioning the angel, and people heard about God's blessings and God's power, but do you know there are some people who say they never felt God's miracles, they never felt his healing, they've never felt his power, and that's what Gideon was saying. We heard heard about this God that delivered them from Egypt, but he's not doing nothing for us. Because if he was our God, we wouldn't be down here starving. We wouldn't be oppressed by the Midianites. I wouldn't be down here hiding. So how could we serve this God that we heard about and our lives are going the way that they're going? So he said, I feel like the Lord has abandoned us. And that's a terrible thing when you feel like the Lord has abandoned you. And he said the Lord has handed us over to the Midianites, which in this case would have been the enemies. All right. So then the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. But Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest tribe of the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. The Lord said to him, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. All right, so now the angel is giving him some encouragement. And what you need to know about this too is that Gideon is saying, Lord, why are you picking me? So think about, God has asked you to do something and you want to know, Lord, why are you picking me? We are the least. I don't have an army. God wanted him to go out and fight against an army that had over 100,000 soldiers. And Gideon didn't even have any soldiers, but the angel said that you will destroy them as if you're fighting one man. So when we're going through trials and tribulations and situations and they seem this big, don't you know that God can reduce them to this size here and make us victorious? In our eyes, they are big things, but in God's eyes, they are small situations, and he will trim them down so that we will be successful and victorious. How many know that on today? That big things to us are small things to God, because God can do anything. So Gideon is just saying here, and I love this conversation that he's having with the angel, because he's just basically saying to the angel, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't do this. I can't do this. And so we have to know that when God tells us we can do it, we can do it. All right. So Gideon replied, 17th verse, if you are truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove that this is really the Lord speaking to me. Don't go away until I come back and bring my offering to you. He answered, I will stay here until you return. So let's talk about this. So Gideon has asked for a sign. Has there anybody here who has ever asked the Lord to give you a sign when you're praying and asking God about something? Anybody? Anybody? I see some nods. I see some, I'm not sure. So Gideon, he asked for a sign because he wanted to make sure that what this angel was saying was really what God wanted him to do. So Gideon, he goes home, he prepares this meal, he brings it back. They put it on this rock, and then the angel causes this fire to come from the rock, which we know fire does not come from a rock, and consume the meal, and that was a sign from God. So a lot of times when we get a sign from God, it's something that normally wouldn't happen. And so normally, how many ever seen a rock on fire or seen fire come from a rock? I don't think we have. So he knew immediately, Gideon did, even though he was afraid and his faith wasn't as strong as it needed to be, he knew immediately that that was a sign from God, and that's how we have to be. So in addition to that sign, he asked God for a sign. And in this part of the scripture, he just asked God for a sign. So he wasn't specific, and that's what we're going to talk about, putting out your fleece, because when you put out your fleece, that means you're specific with God. God, I need this to happen. If it's going to happen, I don't know, make the sun stop. God, if this is going to happen, have so-and-so come up to me and talk to me about it today. God, if this is going to happen, show it to me in my Bible so that I will be able to know that it's God, that you're leading and guiding me in the right direction. So the difference is that with this first sign, he didn't ask God how to do it. He just asked God for a sign. Okay? So think about that. All right, so there were some other things that God wanted him to do. And so I told you all earlier that they were disobedient. And so one of the things that they did is they was worshiping a God called Baal. So it wasn't our God, it was a God called Baal. And so what God told Gideon to do is tear down that statue, all right? In the 25th verse, he's telling him to tear it down and build an altar. And so what Gideon did was he took some men with him and they cut it down, 27th verse. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had commanded. But he did it at night because he was afraid of his father's household and the people of the town. So it would be just like if we showed up here and this church was just gone. What would we think? Somebody came back and burned it down. It was just gone. We'd be like, what? Who did that? So it was that kind of thing. They worshiped this idol. And so when Gideon, we keep talking about Gideon, he hiding in the wine press, he questioning the angel. God tells him to take down this statue of Baal. So instead of him doing it in the daytime, he goes at night because he's still afraid. He's obedient to God, but he's still afraid. And sometimes it's like that. It's not that we are not going to do what God has told us to do, but sometimes we're just afraid. Sometimes we just don't have the courage to do what God told us to do. But what I like about it, even though he didn't have the courage to do it in the daytime, he still got it done, didn't he? So sometimes we have to sneak and do what it is that God tells us to do if we're afraid, but we still have to get it done anyway because it's best to be obedient, okay? So he tore it down. The people of the town, they came looking for him, came to his house, and the way that his father was able to get the people off Gideon is it was such a logical argument with the mob that are coming for him because he took 10 people with him, right? And so how many know when you go to do something you're not supposed to do, don't take nobody with you? How many know that? Because eventually somebody will tell, right? So he took the 10 men and somebody told. So that's how they knew it was Gideon. But when they came to his house to get him, Gideon's father said, if Baal is really the God that you think that he is, he don't need you all in this mob coming to get Gideon. He'll take care of Gideon himself. And wasn't it like the great argument? If Baal is this great God, he'll take care of Gideon. He didn't send y'all down here to take care of Gideon. So they said, okay, and they left. All right? So let's keep moving. So we got this Gideon. He's hiding. He's afraid. His faith is weak, but he's still moving on in the name of God. So don't let fear, don't let low self-esteem in some areas keep you from doing what God has sent you to do, because when God gives you something to do, how many know that he will make a way? He will move people out the way. He will change situations. All he needs us to do is go forth. And we think about that in the book of Jonah. Remember, he told Jonah to warn the town that if they don't do what they're supposed to do, he's going to destroy the town. And Jonah took himself and went somewhere else and did something else instead of going down there. And he ended up in the belly of a fish because he was afraid or he didn't want to do it. So God will make a way. Jonah's issue was they not going to listen to me. These people, they just going to continue to sin anyway. I don't know why God's sending me down here anyway. All this stuff that he had in his mind, but he was supposed to just go and do what God told him to do. And that's how we have to be. And when we do that, when we get wherever we're going, God will already have it worked out and he will already have it fixed. All right? Let's move to the 36th verse, okay? So then Gideon said to God, Gideon still talking to God, because see, God has set Gideon up to go and fight the Midianites. And remember, Gideon didn't even really have an army, and those are in other verses, other chapters, but he's still thinking, God, this can't be right. So 36th verse says, then Gideon said to God, if you are truly going to use me to rescue Israel as you promised, prove it to me in this way. I will put a wool fleece, and when we're talking about putting out a fleece, on the threshing floor tonight, okay, and that's where he was down there threshing the wheat. If the fleece is wet with dew in the morning, but the ground is dry, then I will know that you are going to help me rescue Israel as you promised. So, how many have ever seen dew on the grass? When you get up in the morning, you have dew on the grass. So what he was saying is, I'm going to put this cloth out, this fleece, where it's supposed to have dew, and if only the fleece is wet and the rest of the threshing floor is dry, then I know that that's a sign that I should move forward. Okay? Think about that. How can the fleece be wet and all the ground around it be dry? That's a miracle, right? That would be a sign. All right? And that is just what happened. 38th verse. When Gideon got up early the next morning he squeezed the fleece and wrung out a whole bowl full of water. So God didn't just put like a little dew on it. He made it soaking wet, to say, look, this is the sign. I'm telling you, this is the sign that he had to wring out the fleece, all right? So in the 39th verse, Gideon, still with low faith, then he said to God, please don't be angry with me, but let me make one more request. Let me use the fleece for one more test. This time, let the fleece remain dry while the ground around it is wet with dew. Okay, so how many know that sometimes we ask God to show us and then we ask him again to do something else? So that first thing just wasn't enough. So he asked God for another sign. And this time he said, I'm going to put the fleece down, let the fleece be dry, and all the ground around it be wet. So the next day, next night, that is exactly what happened. And the difference between this and the first time he asked God for a sign. But this time he was specific in what he wanted God to do for him. So putting out your fleece means that you are specific in what it is that you want God to do for you. And the 40th verse says, so that night God did as Gideon asked. The fleece was dry in the morning, but the ground was covered with dew. All right. So think about that. God will give us a sign, and it's okay to ask for a sign. Some people say, oh, if you ask for a sign, you're not showing faith and all that kind of stuff, but you're asking for a sign because sometimes you need encouragement, don't you? How many need encouragement sometimes? You just need encouragement along the way. How many just need confirmation? You just need the Lord to say, okay, go ahead. And so it's not that you testing God or you trying God, but my other thought about this too is you wouldn't ask God for something he couldn't do. And so he's an almighty God. And so to ask him for a sign, you asking him because you believe in him and you trust him and you know that he can give you a sign. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that whatever is a sign for me may not be a sign for you. So think about that. Don't say, well, Reverend Monica said, well, she asked for it this way and God showed it to her that way. That may not be the sign that you want to ask God for. So you have to ask him for the sign that works for you. So I want to share, before I share some of the fleeces that I have put out, and I didn't even know what it was called, but I want to share some stories with you that I found on the internet. So the first one is, let me put on my glasses so I can see this. All right. So the first one is this lady, she was at work and she was in a really bad situation at work. And so she felt that there was no way out. So she put 2 prayers before the Lord, 2 fleeces, if you will, before the Lord. And she said that, it was hard because it was a hard job market. And she asked God to give her peace about staying or provide a way out. That was, she said, God, 2 things. She asked him for 2 things. God, give me peace about staying or give me a way out. And she said jobs are scarce. So within a week, one of her friends called her and they had an opening at her job, and she got the job, and she ended up retiring from there, and everything was good. And she was thanking God because she put her fleece out there. God, show me a sign if I should leave this job or if I should stay. And the answer was she should leave because a week later, a job opportunity was presented to her. So that was her fleece, and that was God answering. The next story is about this person who had a successful accounting practice. And the issue with the accounting practice was that he worked so much that he wasn't at home a lot. So it was taking time away from his family. And you know how that goes. If you're not home, that causes all kinds of problems. So what he did was he put his fleece out to God. And what he said was, so this guy came in and said, I think you should work for us. And he like, no, I think I should work for myself because I enjoy working for myself, even though it's taken away from my family. So he knew that was the issue. So he said to God, if I'm supposed to go to this new job, I'm going to put these 2 conditions out. He said the first one I should be able to write my own job description, and the next one I should be able to set my own compensation package. Okay, those were the two things. He said, God, if those two things happen, then I know I'm supposed to leave this business that I created and go work for this other company. So the guy came back in, and he presented his job description, he presented his compensation package, and the guy said, well, when can you start? And so he knew that he was supposed to start the new job. So he didn't question God, because exactly what he asked God for, God did. So he knew that it was time for him to move on to the next job. And things worked out for his family, and things worked out for his career. All right, so this one I found extremely interesting. So this guy, he had an impression during his morning devotional that he should pop the question to a young lady that he had been seeing. So he should propose, marriage to her. But the problem was they had stopped dating. He lost contact with her. He had not seen her in a while. He knew her family. And so and this was before Google and internet and all that, so he couldn't like Google her and look her up on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So the only way he could contact her was through the mail. So he said, well, he was going to contact her father to get her address. And so he was saying, how do you propose to somebody through the mail? How do you write a letter and do that? That just doesn't make sense. But this impression was so on him that this is the person who he needed to be with. So his fleece to the Lord was what he said. He said, okay, Lord, if this is something I'm going to do without significant delay, then show me just one person who has ever proposed this way, because to me it just seems wrong. So he's putting his fleece out there. He's asking God for a sign. He's saying, Lord, just show me one person who ever proposed to somebody by writing a letter or through the mail. So guess what happened? So a couple days later, he was doing his morning devotional, and he was reading a biography of George Mueller, who was a wonderful man of prayer and Christian service. And as he was reading his devotion, George started talking about how he was journaling in his journal, and how the lady who he married was through a letter that he wrote and sent through the mail. And he had just asked, just show me one. So he did it. That was his confirmation. And that is what I try to tell people, like, there are no coincidences. When I'm doing my daily devotional and my daily bread and all that, and the Lord is giving me just the message that I need for that day, well, the daily bread was purchased long time ago, but see, published long time ago, months ago, maybe even a year ago, before I came up with the situation. But God already knows the future, so he'll make sure that that information is ready for you at the right time, just when you need it. So he ended up doing that. He wrote the letter, and they've been happily married for over 26 years. Okay, so he did that. So that was his fleece. All right, so let's keep going. Another one. This lady, she was a teacher, and I could relate to this one. And she had a horrible class, and they were just doing all kinds of things. And so she had finally decided that she was going to quit teaching. So after school was out, she packed up her room and she went on a vacation with her family. And she says here, to make them miserable, because she was miserable. And so she said to the Lord, if I'm supposed to go back and teach, then have 2 students write me a letter. That's what she said. I need 2 students to write me a note thanking me for helping them. When she got back from her vacation, she had one letter came on a Monday and one letter came on a Wednesday, and it was 2 students thanking her for helping them. And so she stayed with teaching, and she remembered that, and the Lord continued to bless her teaching, and she knew that that was what she needed to do. And so we have to remember, don't be afraid to put out your fleece. Don't be afraid to ask God for something that's specific to you. And so I want to share different ways that I've done it. So, like Gideon's first request in that chapter, he just asked God to show him a sign. So I have done that. I didn't tell God, what to do or how to do it. I just asked God to show me a sign. And a lot of times when I pray, I feel like I pray in reverse. So I'm not always asking God for things. I'm asking God not to give me things. So case in point, with the job I'm on now, I said, Lord, if it's going to interfere with the ministry, then don't give me that job. I wanted the job, but this is more important. And so that was my prayer. So the sign to me that it was okay to accept the job was that they offered me the job. And so that was the sign, because I said, don't give it to me. In other words, don't call me and say you didn't get it, whatever. So another time, when I put my fleece out there, and I didn't know what it was called at the time, was I needed some help with some work. And so I knew a person who was really good at doing this kind of work, but he was the kind of person, you ever met somebody you never want to see again? Anybody? So he was that kind of person. But he did really good work. And so I was like, I need to get this work done, but I do not want to call him. It's just too much. It's too much drama. It's just too much. So I prayed to the Lord, and I hadn't seen this person in years. And I prayed to the Lord, and I said, well, Lord, if this person is supposed to help me with the work, have them contact me. So again, I haven't, contacted or connected with that person in years. No text, no Facebook, no nothing, no phone call, nothing. I was sitting out here on this lot in my car, and that person walked up to my car and was like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, okay. I had just prayed to God about it, let the person contact me, about it. And so then, like Gideon, sometimes now you're trying to second guess God now. Okay, can I work with this person? Yes, you can, because you already asked God. You put your fleece out there and said you needed the person to contact you if it was okay. So anyway, long story short, the person showed up. We was able to get the work done. And how many know that sometimes when people show up for a specific thing, that's all they for, and it's time for them to move on. So you have to keep that in mind too. So got the work done, and so I was just thanking God, because it got me to reflecting as I was studying this lesson over my life, and just the times when I have asked God for signs and different things. And so people will say, oh, that didn't happen. I remember when I was graduating from high school and I wanted to go to the Air Force. Went to the recruitment office, and talked to the people and everything. And so you figure I'm like 18, right? But see, even then, I knew to call on the Lord. Even back then, so many years ago, I knew to ask God. So I went home and I prayed about it, and I said, God, should I go to the Air Force? And I heard a voice just as clear as you all are talking now say no, just like that. So I called the recruiter, and I said, I'm not going to be able to come back in. I'm not going to be able to come. And I didn't have a reason. I didn't know why. I heard no or anything, but I had asked God the question, and to show me. So think, when people say, oh, you just worrying God, you just got little faith, you just need to hold on, think about the story of Gideon. You're not testing God, you're not asking God for anything that he cannot do. What you're asking for is encouragement, you're asking for guidance, and you're asking for confirmation. So how many want to be on the road that God wants you on? I know I do. And so I don't want to go down the wrong path and then have to back up and start over and all of that. So put your fleece out to God, and be specific if you feel you need to. And sometimes, as I was thinking about this, sometimes I don't even ask God for a sign because I'm not ready for the answer. So when you ask God for a sign, when you put your fleece out there, be ready for the answer. And because I was like, you know what? I should ask God for a sign about so-and-so. And I was like, nah, I'm not ready to deal with that, because what if he says no? What if he says go the other way, don't go the way you want to go? So think about that when you're asking God for guidance and you expect him to give it to you, he will give you guidance, and he will, give you a sign. And so as we conclude on today, I want you to put your fleece out there and look at our points. And the first one in this book of Judges is that it's important to reflect on all that God has done for us. So when you feel low and you feel like, oh God, why is all this happening to me and your life is going off the rails, which is the second point, sometimes we just have to stop and examine ourselves and be like, Lord, am I just off track? Lord, am I out of your will? What should I be doing? Because again, all the things that happen to us is not because the enemy is so evil, it's because we're not doing what we need to do. And God will allow our problems to overtake us, because what he's doing is he's pushing us back his way. Because they cried out to the Lord because they were hungry and starving. Sometimes God will put us in a situation where we can't turn to mama, daddy, brother, sister. Only the Lord can get us out of a situation. But I want to go to the Lord without him pushing me there. I don't need to hit rock bottom to cry out to the Lord and to keep my relationship with the Lord. So think about that. The next one is, we have to know when we cry out to the Lord, understanding that we need to repent. And so again, reflecting on your life, repenting, turning things around, changing things so that we can live a life that's pleasing to God, and so that he will hear us when we cry, and that he will change things for us. The next thing is, weak faith is better than no faith. And the reason I put that up there is because, to me, when you read this about Gideon, him hiding and taking down the idols at night and keep questioning the angel, he had some faith, but he didn't have strong faith. So don't be wary when you have weak faith for a situation to work out. Don't worry about that. Some faith is better than no faith. Okay, keep that in mind. People might question your faith. Oh, if you had more faith, you wouldn't be saying that. Oh, if you had more faith, you wouldn't be doing that. Oh, if you had more faith, you wouldn't be depressed and laying in the bed. Oh, if you had, don't listen to all that. Some faith is better than no faith. We just have to ask God to increase our faith in those situations. And then the last one is, ask God for a sign to encourage or to confirm. And don't be afraid to do that. And again, any sign. I told you about, I read these stories to you off the internet, but I told you about some personal things that happened in my life too. And just a few things I shared, it just doesn't stop there. Like, I'll just be reading my Bible, open my Bible for the day and read it, and the very scripture that I'm reading is exactly what I was just asking God for an answer to. Has that ever happened to anybody? Just that very day. And this happens to me a lot at work, and I thank God this happens a lot. I'll be thinking about something or a situation, and then the next thing I know, somebody at work will come up to me and start talking about just what I was thinking about, or just what I needed the answer to. And then I always look up and I say, thank you, Lord, because they didn't know I needed that information. It's just the Lord sent that person in there to me so that they could talk to me about, what it is I was thinking about. So again, ask for a sign. And I want to hear about this. I don't want you all to feel like you can't ask God for a sign, and come back and testify, to the goodness of God. All right? Everybody good? All right.